Good afternoon and welcome to the first part of our wastewater operator certification webinar series. This is a 10-part series that we'll be doing over the next 40 weeks to help you prepare for the wastewater operator certification exam. And today we're going to learn the basics of how do you become a wastewater operator? What do you need to do and how do you go about doing that? So just some background on us and why we're here today. So we are the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and we're actually part of the School of Engineering at the University of New Mexico. Here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you can see the Sandia Mountains there, the Rio Grande there in the front, and that's our building right there. You also see it in my background back here at the Civil Engineering, Centennial Engineering building on main campus. I'd also like to introduce Wichita State University and their Environmental Finance Center. They are part of this program with us on doing wastewater at tribal nations. And just real quick, they have the Heartland Environmental Justice Center. And so you might be familiar with the Heartland Environmental Justice Center and may have received assistance from them before. And so they are part of the Hugo Wall School of Public Affairs at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas. Real quick, I'm Matt Ziegler. I'm the Tribal Water Utility Program Director here at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And I have been working with some of you for over 20 years on water issues at your tribal nation. And so I have a lot of experience with many of you and am good friends, but I want to make sure to introduce myself to the rest of you who I've not met before. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, James Markham. Do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. Like it says on the page there, I'm a research engineer here at the Southwest EFC. I've been here for 8 or 9 years now, do training and technical assistance in a wide variety of topics. Happy to be here. Happy to meet you all.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, James. And James is going to be doing the second half of the training, in about an hour. I'd also like to introduce my other colleague, Tucker Colvin, who is based out of Billings, Montana. Tucker, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, it's great to be here. I look forward to working with you all more. I'm not going to be presenting today, but I'll be presenting. I'll be one of the presenters in next month's training and other subsequent training. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tucker. And you're welcome to email or talk to any of us, and any of us can help you out. Let's just first talk about kind of why we're here and how we're able to do this type of training. The work we're doing today is part of our tribal wastewater program. And so we assist tribal wastewater systems in EPA Regions 6, 7, and 8. So we're helping these tribal nations with their wastewater in 15 different states. And we provide training and technical assistance to these communities to help prevent, reduce, and eliminate pollution. We're also helping and enabling these tribal communities to comply with environmental regulations and build their technical, managerial, and financial capacity to sustainably operate your wastewater infrastructure. And we're helping to ensure that your communities have access to public funding to meet wastewater infrastructure needs. So we do training and we do assistance to help you increase your capacity, as well as help you access infrastructure funding to make sure your needs are met. And so we support your communities in protecting both public health and the environment. And we've been doing that through a variety of methods. The first, we've been reaching out to many of you, not everybody yet, to look and do a needs assessment for your community, to understand what your current wastewater infrastructure is, and are there any unmet wastewater infrastructure needs that you have that we could help you address and find funding for. The needs assessment also helps us understand, are there any technical assistance needs that you may have to help build your TMF capacity? Or are there trainings that we can do to help you with that. And so if you have any training needs, if you have any ideas for trainings, go ahead and put them in the chat or reach out to us individually to share those with us. We're also starting a peer-to-peer learning session, and we're going to kick those off in New Mexico this next year and have some in-person peer-to-peer learning, and then we'll expand it to the other states in the regions after this year. So our Tribal Wastewater Operator Certification Series, it starts today and it'll occur every 4 weeks on Wednesdays, and it's going to occur from 1 to 3 p.m. Mountain Time or 2 to 4 p.m. Central Time for those of you in the Central Time Zone. And as you can see, we're going to do wastewater math and really start that off right at the beginning. Starting in January, we'll go into collection systems and mechanical systems after that. We're going to look at preliminary treatment and sedimentation, treatment ponds and fixed film media. We're going to look at activated sludge, solids handling and land application, talk about disinfection and tertiary treatment, and then look at advanced wastewater math, and finally round it out with regulatory requirements, laboratory procedures, and then talk about safety. And so all of these are going to cover some of that basic information you need to go ahead and apply, take the certification exam in your state, and then become a certified wastewater operator. So today's agenda, for the first hour, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be a certified water utility operator. We're going to talk about all of the benefits of certification and why wastewater operations is a great career. And then we're going to go in and look at the different certification programs and what some of their requirements may be. And then at 2 o'clock Mountain Time, 3 o'clock Central, my colleague James will get into how do you study well? You know, what are some of your study tips that you have, and how to learn how to study, because you're not going to be able to pull in all the information you need through this webinar, maybe not through your job. Maybe you don't do activated sludge, but you still want to become a certified operator. So we'll look at it. How do you study? It's an important part of becoming certified and taking the test. And then James is also going to cover some of those test-taking tips. And so it's been a long time since I've done a multiple choice exam, you know, and so it's probably been a long time for you as well. And it's important to know how to take those exams. And there's some strategies and tips involved that can help you do a better job on those types of exams. So let's look at what it means to be a certified water utility operator. And so you see that being certified and operating water utilities is kind of a continual process. And so up here at the top, this is what we do as a drinking water operator. And so if you're a certified drinking water operator and work at a drinking water system, you know all about your water sources and how you treat your water, and then how you make it drinkable and meet compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. You know, what happens to it once it's in the distribution system and the consumers are ingesting it. And so that's an important part, but it's only half of the story. The other half of the story are wastewater operators. And, you know, wastewater it's really a more complicated process. It takes a little bit more knowledge than most of our drinking water systems in this country. Most of our drinking water systems get water from the ground and they disinfect with sodium hypochlorite with a bleach solution. But wastewater, we have to do a little bit more with it to make sure that it's treated, that it is outflow out of the plant, and it goes back to the source, and make sure that it meets Clean Water Act standards, and it can flow back into our rivers, our lakes, our oceans. And so as a certified operator, you're part of this process. And, it's all about caring for the health and needs of those that you serve. It's about protecting the public health of our communities and protecting the health of our elders, of our grandparents, of our children, those that are sick, our families. And so we're playing a very important role in terms of protecting the health of our communities. And, there's another thing that's not here on the screen, but you all are also first responders. You are out there every day making sure that health is protected. It's a very important role in our communities. And we're super happy that you're able to join us today and learn how you might be able to take advantage of your role and become certified. Some other benefits of being certified? Well, you're acknowledged as a trained and certified professional. This is a professional career. You're trained, you're certified, you know what you're doing. You get an increased knowledge and ability and confidence in yourself as a trained professional. You know what you're doing. And your public sees you doing your job, knows that you're doing a good job, and so they have increased public confidence in you and your water utility. Being certified also helps your system secure funding for wastewater improvements. And so many funding sources do require a certified operator be on staff because they want to make sure that you have the capacity to maintain and operate the infrastructure that is installed in a safe, effective manner. Other certification benefits, there's a very clear path for career progression. Sometimes you get in a job and it's kind of like what they call a dead-end job, and you don't really know where you're going to go on from what you're doing now. Well, being certified and getting higher levels of certification gives you that path for career progression to move from a lower position, lower pay, to higher position and higher pay. Also, it's a portable career. It's not like you need a bunch of stuff. You can take your knowledge, your skills that you've acquired, and you can go somewhere else. You can take your certification and go and get reciprocity with another certifying authority and become certified in a different state or with a different program. The career is in demand. I'm sure many of you have heard that most of our wastewater operators are reaching the age of retirement. And so they're going to retire, and we're going to need more wastewater operators to protect and public health and the environment in our communities. And the pay is competitive. So I'm going to show you, this is from the Bureau of Labor Certificates, labor statistics, and it kind of shows across the US what that annual mean wage is for our water and wastewater treatment plant operators. And so when we talk about mean wage, that's kind of the same thing as an average. They basically add up everybody, what everybody makes, they divide by the total number, and we get the mean wage. And so you can see there's quite a range, but we can see that there's pretty good wages out there. And while there may be some that are lower than this, there's going to be others that are higher than this top level. So this is just what's in the middle. And, nearer to our cities, there's probably higher wages than there are out in the country. But it is a good competitive career with room to move ahead and to increase your pay. So overall, we're going to talk about what the general requirements are for certification. Each certification program is going to be a little bit different. And so some may require more or less education, but, basically, you all need to have either a high school diploma, a GED, or a high school equivalency certificate, which is like a GED. So you need to have at least the 12 years of education associated with that. Some programs do award credit with post-secondary education, like college or community college, for certification at higher levels. So you can substitute experience for school at the higher levels, and we'll look at some programs that do that. You also have to have some experience working at a water system or a wastewater system. And so some programs, you only need a very little bit of experience, but in general, you need about 6 months of experience to become an operator in training. And then if you want to become a level 1 or the first level of certified wastewater operator, you need about a year of experience. Once you have that experience, you can take the exam and become certified. We also need to make sure that we have some continuing education hours for classes like you're attending today. So some programs require 10 hours for a level 1 operator. Some may require 4 hours to become a level 1 operator. It varies from program to program, but you do need some continuing education. And then you've got to pass the test. That's the last step. In most programs, you need to do 70% or better. Some of the lower levels of certification, like an operator in training, will maybe only have a 50-question exam, and so you need to do 35 out of 50 questions right. Most exams will have 100 multiple choice questions, and so you need to get 70 or better right. There are some states that do require about 110 questions, and so that's a pretty lengthy exam. But once you have your education, once you have your experience and have your continuing education and pass the exam, then you can get your certificate. And depending on the state, that certificate will be good for 1 to 3 years before you have to renew it. And so the state of Oklahoma, for example, has moved to renewals every year, whereas like the state of New Mexico, or I think the state of Montana, is renewed once every 3 years. Be aware, though, that many programs are going to require you to do sequential certification. And what that means is you have to become certified at the beginning level first before you can be certified at the next level. You can't just jump to the highest level of certification right away. You have to do it from the first to the second to the third to the fourth level before you can get that top level certification. So it does take some time and some investment to be able to do that. So how do you know what type of certification you need and what level? And it's a combination of factors, and each state or each EPA region has a different combination of factors to make this determination. And so your level and type of certification is going to be based on, well, what is your wastewater system type? What type of treatment are you using? Are you just going into lagoons? Or are you doing some sort of activated sludge or a membrane type of method for wastewater treatment? So that's one of the factors that comes into play. It also depends on how many people you serve. Smaller communities that only serve, a couple hundred people really don't have to have a super high level of certification as compared to certification requirements for some of our more populous cities. Also, are you just going to be doing collections of wastewater, or are you also going to be doing treatment? And so all of these factors come together to help determine what type of certification you need to get and at what level. So we're going to look at the different options out there. We're going to look at the different state programs. There's also some national EPA programs that do wastewater certification. And so you may be familiar with the Intertribal Council of Arizona. And so we call that ITCA, or the United South and Eastern Tribes, or USET. And so you may notice that there's one missing here. for wastewater certifications. And you may be familiar that there is not a national EPA tribal wastewater certification program. There is one for drinking water, but EPA does not have a national tribal wastewater certification program. So that's not one of our choices here. We have to go with one of these other choices to become certified. And we're going to start with some of these tribal programs. And the first is the United South and Eastern Tribes, USET. And you can see that USET is a tribal consortium, and it really covers the Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the United States. And so when we're talking about EPA Regions 6, 7, and 8, it only covers a couple of states in our region. And so it covers tribal nations in Texas, as well as tribal nations in Louisiana. You can find out more about that program using the link below. And I'm not expecting you to go ahead and try and copy that down real quick. We will send you a PDF with these slides by Friday, and those slides will be hot linked to be able to access each of the websites that we're going to be listing today, because we're going to be going through about 16 different programs of how you can get certified. And so really the intent of going through all these programs is a resource for you to be able to access certification information in your state. So USET, so this is a national EPA tribal program. And so, you know, I said there wasn't a national EPA tribal program. And when I was talking about that, I meant that EPA themselves is not a certifying authority nationally for wastewater. Instead, USET and Intertribal Council of Arizona have a national EPA tribal program, and they're recognized in the Federal Register as certifying authorities for tribal nations nationally. But there is no certifying authority that is just EPA. And you can see they have a number of different wastewater certifications, everything from treatment and collection to laboratories to operator and training. And they also do offer drinking water certification. So if you need more information about their program, you can follow that link below. One thing to note is that USET does get their examinations from a company called Water Professionals International, also known as the Association of Boards of Certification, or ABC. And so that's where they get their exam materials from. And we'll look later in the presentation this morning. ABC or WPI are the industry standard for operator certification and exams. And many state programs, as well as these national programs, do use them for their examinations. Intertribal Council of Arizona, they're another national EPA tribal program that does offer certifications throughout the different states, only to tribal nations, okay? And they offer a number of different wastewater certification, everything from collections to treatment. They also do offer drinking water certification, and they have a utility management certification program. To get more information about Intertribal Council of Arizona and their certification program, you can follow that link. ITCA also uses the Association of Boards of Certification and Water Professionals International to do their certification, or to do their examinations. So we're going to go through the state programs one by one. You know, we do have participants from probably up to 15 different states on this webinar. And so, you know, if you aren't able to get certified for wastewater through USET or through Intertribal Council of Arizona, then you're going to have to go through the state that your wastewater system is in. So for those of you in New Mexico, the New Mexico Environment Department offers wastewater certification. You can see they have a number of different levels of certification, depending again on the complexity of your treatment system, the population you serve. And they also offer some wastewater lab tech certifications and collection systems. and you can see some of the basic requirements and how much the fee for the exam costs. And then the type of training credits that are required. All of these require the high school diploma, GED, or high school equivalency. More information, you can go to their website. I know that it's become harder for our wastewater systems in New Mexico to take the exam lately. It's moved to an online exam through a single provider. So it does take a bit of time to get your application approved to test, and then also to get scheduled for an exam. So it's not something that happens quickly. So we want to make sure that we plan ahead. In Texas, it's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality that oversees the wastewater operator certification in the state. You can get more information at this link here. You can see for Texas, instead of a level 1, level 2, so on and so forth, they do it by letters, and wastewater D is the lowest level of certification. You can see basically what you need in terms of training for each of the different levels, some of the elective training courses that you might need, and then what sort of education and work experience is needed to become certified at each level. So you have to start here at the bottom and progress through if you want to get higher levels of certification. In Louisiana, it's the Louisiana Department of Health that oversees their wastewater operator certification program. And you can see that they offer both collection and treatment certification for 4 different levels. It was a little bit difficult to figure out, what the requirements are and how they determine at which level you can become certified. They do it based on a points system. And so you get a certain number of points for having your high school diploma, for having some post-secondary education. For experience, you get some more points. And so as you accumulate these points, you can move up in certification level. We've already talked a bit about Oklahoma. The state of Oklahoma and their Department on Environmental Quality is who oversees wastewater certification in the state. They do it similar to Texas, where wastewater D is your basic level, and then you can move up in your levels based on your training, your education, and your work experience. So you can follow, you can get more information here on the link. And I do see that we did have a question come in. What type of certification is required for working on tribal trust land in Oklahoma? And so, thank you for that question. And so, it really, again, EPA oversees the NPDES permitting for tribal wastewater systems in Oklahoma. And so it's going to be based, your certification type and your level is going to, again, be based off of your population served, the complexity of your treatment system. And so we can help you figure out what type and level of certification is required. And we can follow up with you after the webinar today. So it's going to be a variety of factors similar to what we've already discussed. And you may think that because you're on tribal trust land that you may not need wastewater certification. But, it really is important. If there isn't a regulatory requirement to have one, it's important to have the correct certification to make sure you're protecting public health and the environment in your community. So I've taken note, and I will follow up with you after the webinar today to help you decide who at what level you need to be certified. So thank you for your question. State of Colorado, it's going to be the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. And so they have a variety of certifications, everything from collections to wastewater treatment to industrial wastewater treatment. They do have a special hybrid certification for small wastewater system operators, and it's going to cover both collections and treatment, and it's only for communities that serve a population of less than 3,300 people. But it could be a great certification for your community, because many of our tribal communities do serve a population of less than 3,300 people. All right, and the state of Utah, it's the Utah Department of Environmental Quality that oversees their certification program. The grade 1 is the lowest level of wastewater certification, and you can see that they all require the 12 years education. And it's a point-based system. And so that 12 years of education, that's going to be your GED, your high school equivalency certificate, or your high school diploma. And so every level of certification does require that 12 years of experience. And at the lowest level in Utah, you need that 12 years of education, and then you need maybe 1 year of operating experience. Or if you have more education, you can substitute education for experience. Actually, it says you can't here. So substitution may not be substituted, education may not be substituted for experience at the lowest levels. And so at the higher levels, you can do that. So more information, Utah certification program is available via that link. The state of Wyoming, their certification program is run by the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. You can see they offer both wastewater treatment certifications and collection system certifications. It wants you to have at least 6 months of experience. And it's based on a 40-hour week. So this is something they specify, that if you're splitting your time between water and wastewater, 6 months of wastewater may take you a full year to get that sort of experience. They also talk about their training requirement. You need at least 35 hours of training in wastewater before you can take the exam and become certified. Let's head up to Montana. And so that's up where Tucker, my colleague, is, up in Billings. And so the state program for Montana is run by the Department of Environmental Quality. Again, they outline pretty clearly what the education requirement is, what your work experience is, and then what type of certifications they do offer. And so for the lowest level of certification, you need at least a year of experience before becoming fully certified. You can find out more information about that program at their link there. Let's go all the way up to North Dakota. It's the North Dakota Environmental Quality Department that oversees the certification. And so it talks about the different classes of certification, if you have high school or not, and if you have any post-high school or other types of degrees, that can all be used to help you become certified. It does talk about DRC and how long you have to be a DRC before you become certified at that level. And so DRC is direct responsible charge. And so that means that you're the operator at your system that is the direct responsible charge for that system. And so we can see that for the higher levels of certification, we have to be a DRC for 1 to up to 2 years before. And so that means that we have to be a DRC at this level for 1 year. That means to go to level 3, we have to be a DRC for 2 years. And then moving up to 4, we have to be at least 2 years at the previous level. We're going to go down to the vacation land for North Dakota, and that's in South Dakota. And that certification program is run by the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And then there's their education, their experience requirements. They start at the lowest level, which is a class 1 operator. That's a high school diploma or certificate, and then 1 year of experience to become certified at that lower level. Okay, let's go down to Nebraska. Again, it's a mix of education, experience, and continuing education. And again, most of them are going to be that high school diploma for the first level, and at least 1 year of experience at a wastewater treatment facility. Those are all the basics that kind of go throughout all of these different programs that we're talking about today. Iowa. All right. The Iowa program is run by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. You can get more information about their program using this link here. And then it talks about the different certification grades, the education, and the experience requirements to get certified at those different levels. So as you can see, with all of these programs, there's a clear progression and a clear career path towards moving to higher levels. You may not stay at the same system. You may become certified and decide to expand out and go to another system. They may offer higher pay and better opportunities, and that can happen. And so we're always sad to see our tribal communities lose some of their wastewater operators because they have become certified at a higher level. They become more confident in their abilities, and they're ready to learn more and have more responsibility. When we look at the state program in Kansas, you can find more information on the Kansas Department of Health and Environment's website here. And so, again, it's going to be that education, experience, and employment. And usually you have to work for a wastewater treatment facility to become certified. You know, that's one of the key requirements is to be employed by a wastewater facility to become certified. It's where you get your experience, and then you can get your education at classes like we are doing today. All right. So that was a super quick review of all the different programs, kind of pretty dull, right? Gosh, going through all those different ones. But again, we have a lot of different attendees from different states that are looking to get certified in wastewater. And so we want to make sure that those resources are available to all of you. And again, we will be sending out these slides, and you will get them in a PDF, and all of those links to those programs will be hot linked. And so, okay, so you've got your education now, you've got your experience, and you have some of those continuing education hours. Okay, so now you're ready to take the exam. And so you may ask yourself, well, what do I need to know to take that exam? How do I know what's going to be on that? So each different certification program is going to have different, what we call need to knows. You know, this is a list of information that you need to know to become certified at a level, at different levels. And so the map I'm showing you here, I couldn't find a newer map. This is from 2018, so from quite some time ago. But you can kind of see that, you know, where different states are getting their need to knows and where they're getting their exams from. And so we can see all of these states in blue, which make up many of the states in EPA Region 6, 7, and 8. They have their own state exams. They have their own state tests, and they maintain their own bank of questions. And so they have their own need to know information for their state. Okay, and so you should be able to find that information through the links that I shared already. But if you go there and you can't find it, let us know, and we'll make sure to find those need to knows for you. When we look at the yellow up here, that's Montana, and I think it's actually North Dakota now. It's Iowa. It's going to be the ITCA program. It's going to be that USET certification program. All of these programs use American Boards of Certification, the Water Professionals International exams that I already mentioned. And so those exams have very specific need to knows for each different certification level for treatment and for collection systems. And actually, I'll share one with you in a minute here once we get through this slide, and we can look at what those need to knows look like. All right, and then when we look at green here, all these green states, those of you in Wyoming or Utah, South Dakota, Nebraska, they have a mix. They use some of ABC's need to knows, but they also use some of their own state specific need to knows. So every state is different, but every state should have need to know materials out there so that you know what you need to know to take the exam and pass it. All right, so let's look at what a need to know criteria looks like. Oh my goodness, that is so small. Let us see. So we're just going to throw that all up on the screen here. And so you're all going to have to squint really hard to see what I'm showing you on this slide. My apologies. So this is Water Professionals International here. That's the associations, the board of certification that do the exams. This is the need to know criteria for a wastewater treatment operator level 1. All right, and so they have the best looking need to knows out there. They're the easiest to read, they're the easiest to understand. And so when we open up this book, we can see that we have these five different content areas. And so the exam is going to cover everything from laboratory analysis, equipment, evaluation and maintenance. It's going to talk about equipment operation, treatment process monitoring, evaluation and adjustment, and then security, safety, and administrative procedures. It tells you exactly how many questions are on the exam for each of these content areas. So we can see lab analysis, there's only 10 questions on the exam. We can see that treatment process monitoring, evaluation, and adjustment has 30 questions on the exam. And the other important part is it's about what is the complexity of those questions. And you can see that the easiest questions on these exams, and we can see there's 2 of those for lab analysis up there. These are questions, these are the different levels of learning. And so recall is the simplest level of learning. And it really is that memorization where you memorize something and then you recall it. And then as we move up in the levels of learning, we can see there's 7 questions where you have to apply that knowledge. So you have to apply the knowledge you've learned to answer the question. And then finally, we can see there's 1 question in the laboratory analysis section that is all about analysis. So we have to know the information, we have to know how to apply it, and then we have to analyze the information to be able to answer the question. And so the lower level exams are probably going to have more of these recall questions where it's all about memorization, whereas the higher level exams is going to be all about analysis and applying and analyzing the information to be able to answer the question. WPI or ABC is also super nice, and they let you know exactly how many math questions are on each of the exams. And you can see at this level 1 treatment, wastewater treatment exam, they only have 10 math questions. A lot of us get, kind of upset, not upset, but, we stress about math, right? Because we don't use it regularly. We don't maybe understand unit conversions, but we can see that we could get every single math question wrong and we could still pass the exam. We'll see more questions related to math at the higher certification levels, but at the beginning certification levels, if your math's not that great, that's okay. You can still pass the exam. And finally, the last part of the need to knows, at least for ABC, WPI, it tells you exactly what sort of information you need to know to be able, what do you have to study to be able to pass the exam? And I'm having to put on my glasses here because this is so darn small. And so you have to know about standard operating procedures. You have to know how to collect samples for bacteriological analysis. Those are your coliform samples, your E. coli samples, your fecal samples. You have to understand about biological analyses like biological oxygen demand or CVODs. You have to understand about chemical oxygen demand and know how about to analyze for nutrients and metals. And then also, what about those physical analyses that you have to do, like measuring pH and temperature? Dissolved oxygen is super important with wastewater treatment, as well as knowing how to measure settleable solids. And then you have to know how to conduct the following. You have to be able to do a physical analysis. You have to do process control laboratory testing. You have to know how to interpret data from your coliform sampling, from your biological analyses, from your chemical analyses. And so if you're able to think about each of these different areas and understand each of these things, then you're probably going to do pretty well on that portion of the exam. So, so right now, we've covered, why it's important to become a certified operator. What are the benefits of it? What are the different certification programs out there? What are need to knows? And this kind of leads into what we'll be covering in the next hour that James is going to be talking about, all about how do I study for the exam and how do I take the exam so that I can make sure I pass it.
We're going to get started on second half of our program today, which is going to be talking about study tips and test tips in general. And I want to start off with my first tip, which is don't panic. Even if you've never taken the wastewater OpCert test before, or maybe you did and you didn't get quite the result that you wanted to, especially after having seen all of the need to knows that Matt so kindly showed us. And the reason that I say don't panic is because the operator test really covers knowledge that you use or could use on the job. It covers a wide range of wastewater treatment topics at a variety of different levels. And though not all of the knowledge that is required for the test might be used in your day-to-day operations, I can pretty much guarantee that at least some of it will reflect things that you do on a day-to-day basis. So for example, for the exam, you're going to need to know how lagoon systems work and how conventional treatment systems work. And maybe you've got a lagoon system. So for the test, you're going to have to learn about conventional treatment systems, but your day-to-day work with your lagoon system is going to give you some practical knowledge that you'll be able to leverage on that exam when you get questions about the lagoon systems. Essentially, this is a wonderful kind of exam because it allows you to leverage that practical experience. Typically, as Matt showed us, you've got to have been working for some period of time, anywhere from a month or two to a year before you can actually take the exam, again, depending on which level exam you're going to take. So that gives you an opportunity to learn day to day, leverage your day-to-day experience on test day, and also use your apprenticeship, that initial work period before you take the exam, to help you with your studying. As Matt pointed out, operator duties cover a wide range of activities, things like inspecting equipment, monitoring operating conditions, collecting and testing water and sewage samples, maybe recording meter and gauge readings and doing other operational tasks. Maybe you will be partially responsible for documenting and reporting test results, either to others in your organization or to regulatory agencies. There's equipment operations, disinfection, processing of solids, cleaning and maintaining equipment, tanks, filters, things like that. Those are things you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. And those are things, as the EPA need to knows showed you, are going to be on the exam. And the nice thing about particularly the EPA need to knows is that they provide a real blueprint for what you have to study and which things you need to cover. So, when you think about what a certified operator is, it's somebody that's been certified by an agency as being qualified to supervise or operate a wastewater facility or a water facility. It basically means, you've got a rubber stamp of approval that says you know how to do your job. So if you are learning on the job, as you become more confident about what you're doing, recognize that that is going to help you pass the exam. It covers theoretical knowledge, but it also covers practical knowledge. And again, even though not all of the concepts that are covered on the exam might be things you do on the day-to-day basis, there is going to be a lot of your work that is directly applicable to the exam. So with that being said, if it's largely related to things that you have to do already, and you're going to have been working on your job for a while, why study at all, right? It's a certification exam that covers what you do. Why study at all? And the reason that you want to study is to find out where your knowledge gaps are. In all likelihood, the exam is going to cover topics that you're not that familiar with, or maybe haven't addressed at all if you're beginning in the field. Or maybe just because your level of training hasn't reached the point to where you do those tasks on a day-to-day basis. In every job, there's also things where you do a small piece of a bigger picture. And oftentimes, particularly at the beginning, we're not exactly sure why we're doing what we're doing, or what the outcome is, or what happens next. So one of the reasons you study for the exam is to figure out what you know and what you don't know. The other reason to do it is to familiarize yourself with the question formats that the exams use and the exam formats. As Matt pointed out, most of us don't take multiple choice tests on the regular, and we certainly typically don't do them on a computer. And depending on which jurisdiction you're in, you may have to take your exam on a computer, which might not be a format that you're used to. So part of the study process and the learning process is not only learning the materials, but learning how to take the test. And I am speaking from experience here. I have failed exams on topics that I knew really, really well because the format of the exam was unexpected. And it threw me. So two things, you're going to familiarize yourself with the questions and test formats, and you're going to use that study to figure out where your knowledge gaps are and what you need to focus more. So why am I showing you a picture of a basketball here? I really like metaphors. Somebody needs to mute their mic. Thank you. I like metaphors, like I said, and I like to think of tests kind of as big game day. So if you think of the OpCert test as your big game day, study is really your practice, right? You want to become a well-rounded player, you want to become a well-rounded operator, you've got to develop the skills. If you're a basketball player, it doesn't do you a lot of good to only be able to hit free throws, or only be able to hit shots when nobody's guarding you. So just like you shoot shots and practice to develop skills on the basketball court, you really have to do the same thing for your career. You have to study your manuals, you have to study your problems, you have to study old tests or sample tests that are available. You do that work under different conditions and in different ways, and you work hard at what you're not good at to get better and become a better all-arounded player. Because again, on the exam, 100 questions typically, you don't have to get them all right, but the more you know, the better chance you have of getting that 70 or higher that you need to pass. It's been well documented that people with better study methods and strategies score higher on exams. And I can tell you that the OpCert exam is not an exam that most people, even people who have a lot of experience, are going to be able to roll in and take cold and pass. And again, if you've taken an OpCert exam before and didn't quite get the results you wanted to, maybe changing how you study will be beneficial. So if study is practice, I think of sample tests kind of like the pickup games that you would engage in, right? Practice tests are like the exam, but they don't have the same consequences, just like, a pickup game with your friends, or maybe down at the local court where you're playing against strangers. It's like the game. It provides some of the similar conditions, but it's not the big game. So it's not as big a deal if you don't do quite as well. And again, it shows you under game conditions or under test conditions what you're good at and what still needs work. If you keep getting stripped as you're going by somebody, you need to work on ball handling. If you can't hit a free throw to save your life, that's the thing you need to work on. Sample tests will help you pinpoint what you know and what you don't know. And when you do these, really focus on areas that you have trouble with, because again, sample tests are going to point out the gaps in your practical knowledge or in your experience or in theory, and then you're going to be able to focus and hone in on what you're bad at. I'm not saying ignore what you're good at, but again, the test covers a very broad range of activities, and you want to make sure that you're pretty solid in all of the categories. So you can use that information, that feedback you get from doing test problems, from doing sample tests under test conditions, to again, fill in those gaps and round out your skill set. It'll give you the direction to follow when you're developing your study plan and your career when you think about it. And then, of course, the test itself is game day. You know, you're never going to expect to win the state championship without ever practicing, at least not realistically. So, you know, this is all build up to a goal. And the good thing is, particularly if you're just starting in this career, you're probably not going to take the exam for 6 months to a year anyway. So you can approach your job and approach your study with the goal of passing this test in mind. And again, a lot of folks don't pass it the first time. That's okay. You can always change your methods. Think about what you did well and what you didn't do well, and change how you study. So let's talk about some study trips, or in other words, how do you run a good practice for yourself? Step one is going to be actually make a study plan. Don't wing it. Figure out how you're going to get from today to how you're going to get from passing the test. How much time do you need? How much time can you devote to that process? You know, can you put aside a couple of hours a day, a couple of hours a weekend? How you're going to chunk out the time to do the study that you need to pass. Do a self-assessment and build a plan around that. Sometimes, you know, if I'm doing some work in an area that I'm somewhat familiar with, and I can find some flashcards or a test that covers those materials, I might start by trying to take a test and see if there's anything that I actually know. No matter what, expect your study plan to change over time. Because as you get better at different things, you're going to focus on them less and focus on the things that you're not so good at. So back to my basketball metaphor, you know, if you're consistently making a hook shot, you don't have to practice it quite as hard. You still have to practice it so you don't get rusty, but it's not the same as maybe learning a new kind of shot that you're not very good at. Another part of studying is managing your time, setting aside a reasonable amount of time for study so that you're not trying to cram everything in at the last minute. It's a lot of material that you have to cover. You do not want to be trying to learn all this stuff the night before the exam. If you take that approach, I can almost guarantee you're going to fail. But you know, if you set aside time over a period of 6 months that you're going to use to study, you want to make sure that you actually use that time to study. You know, we're all grown-ups here. Life throws things at us. Things get in the way. Life gets in the way. You know, if you miss a study session, plan to make it up. Think of it like you're taking a class. You know, the study is essentially your homework. You may not be able to stick to the schedule perfectly, but you want to make sure that you cover your materials as you're going through and progressing. With that in mind, start studying early, well before the exam date. You know, if the exam's on the 30th, you don't want to start the weekend before. This is really just another way of saying manage your time over the long run. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that this picture of a calendar is not implying that you can start on, you know, Friday the 5th and expect to pass this exam on the 30th. The point here is just that it's going to take time, and you want to set yourself goals to meet over the course of your study, plan for some sample tests, things like that. It's really about thinking about where you are today, where you need to be on test day, and working toward that goal and reevaluating periodically, you know, by looking at your progress. You know, are you studying all the materials that you wanted to? Are you understanding the different areas in a way that you can explain them to others? You know, are you on track to take the test when you've planned to take it? And sometimes you might not be, and then the question becomes, how do you deal with that? Maybe you change your study plan, maybe you change the test date. That's kind of up to you, but you want to make sure that you are approaching it thoughtfully and purposefully, because as Matt said, you know, this is a great career to get into. There's room to grow. There are higher level certifications that you can get to. So you really want to approach this in a thoughtful and proactive manner to make sure that when you come time to take the test, you are ready for it. Just like anything else, nail down the fundamentals. You know, the ITCA need to knows and the other state need to knows, which you can get through the various websites that Matt showed you. Lay out a blueprint for you. They tell you which topics are going to be covered, and in many cases tell you how many questions are going to be covering that topic on the exam. And also, you know, the ITCA exam particularly gives you some idea about, you know, what's going to be sort of memorization, recall, how much analysis you're going to do, how much application you're going to do. You know, there's only 10 math questions. As Matt said, you could get them all wrong and still pass the exam. Ideally, you don't want to, because that math is part of the job and you want to understand the math so that you can understand your job. But remember, you don't need a perfect game. You just have to get a passing score, and that's all. So, you know, build on that practical knowledge. You've got that need to know list. You can use that and the various sample questions and study materials, some of which we're going to talk about here in a bit, to figure out what you're comfortable with, what's essentially review for you, and what's new material that you have to absorb, and what areas you're just having trouble with and it's just not sticking. And again, work hard on the weak spots. It's great if you can always hit that free throw, but it's not the only shot you're going to have to make. You're going to have to be able to switch it up and jump from topic to topic in the exam. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with all of the topics that are going to be covered. As I said, it is a practical exam in many ways. So you can leverage your practical work for your study. You can learn from your coworkers. You can approach learning your new duties on the job as part of your study for the certification. You know, as you learn new things on the job, ask questions, why you're doing things, how things work, what formulas are being used here, what processes are being used here. Explain processes to each other as you're doing things, or why you're doing what you're doing. I have often found that if I cannot explain something to somebody, it means I don't really understand it very well. So you can lean on your buddies, your coworkers, whether those are folks that are in training like you or people who've been in the industry for a while, and use that knowledge and learn from them. You know, learn from our elders about the topics that we're talking about here. Can't do it alone. There are tons of training materials and handouts and manuals out there. And you should use them. And I'm going to point out some very specific sort of general guides that are useful, but also the specific materials provided by your jurisdiction are going to be really useful. As Matt pointed out, there are a bunch of different states in our region, in these 3 regions, and everybody has a variation on a theme in terms of what they cover on their exam, how they cover it, and the need to knows. But the good thing is, for the most part, all of that information is laid out there. So part of the process is figuring out, you know, who you're going to take your exam from, what kind of exam they use. Are you in a state that uses the ABC tests? Are you in a USET state and you're going to use that? Or does your state have, like New Mexico, its own exam that you're going to have to be taking? Because pretty much every one of these states has some sort of need to knows, and most of them also have some study guides available to you that lay out in more detail the information that's actually going to be covered on the test. So for example, we've got the Kansas Class 1 need to knows here. This is sort of the short form version that shows what topics are going to be covered. And other states like New Mexico may actually even have a certification study manual, or if you're doing one of the ABC tests, they have specific study materials and courses that are designed to help you pass their test. Side note, the NMED version that I'm showing here isn't actually available on their website anymore, but you may have coworkers if you're in the state that have a copy, and if not, reach out to us, we can help you get one. So again, sort of to dive into specifics for New Mexico. So for all certification levels in New Mexico, you need to know about cross connections, collection systems, treatment ponds, sampling and reporting, sedimentation, applicable state and federal regulations. There's some safety, some dechlorination issues, plant pre-treatment mechanical systems, disinfection, and some other general knowledge. And so you can see this is a little different than what was shown on the slides that Matt showed you for the WPI test, but it's very, very similar. So again, if you're in New Mexico and you're taking the New Mexico test, this is a good place to start because it should give you an idea of which parts of the guide you actually need to study very closely because those topics are going to be on the exam. This is an older version of the sheets that Matt showed you for the Water Professionals International exam. But it's also important to recognize that as you progress up through the levels, you are going to be tested on the same sort of knowledge. So for example, the security, safety, and administrative procedures, about 10% of your test is going to be on that, whether it's level 1 or level 4. Other categories, however, the weighting changes somewhat. So for a level 1 exam, about 25% of the exam is going to be on equipment evaluation and maintenance, whereas if you're doing a level 4 exam, only about 15% of the test is on it because it's less important for the testing procedures. Also because you've gone through 3 exams that show you know something about that. You can see when we look at the treatment processes in the lab analysis, the opposite is, or a similar situation is true. You need to know less about treatment processes early on in your career, more later, far less about lab analysis early on in your career and more later. So this gives you some ideas on, the weighting of the exam, as Matt said, theoretically, you could get through an exam, miss all of the math questions and still pass. Same thing goes with the analysis. Theoretically, you could get through a level 1 exam and get all of the lab questions wrong. That being said, you don't want to take that as your approach. But, if you're consistently getting all the lab analysis stuff correct, focus on one of the other areas that is more heavily weighted because you want to make sure that you are really solid in those 3 middle categories because that's what the bulk of the exam is going to cover. It's also really important to get familiar with the reference documents, which are usually part of the study guide, that you're going to be able to use during the exam. Most of the exams do not expect you to have memorized every possible formula that's out there. They're going to give you a reference guide because it's like real life. You can look things up. That being said, you want to know where in your reference guide things are so that you're not paging through looking for a formula and wasting time doing that. It's good to know, like, okay, the chemical feed, the loading stuff in New Mexico, that's in Appendix B, whereas sort of the general conversion factors, that's in the wastewater math Appendix A part. Having a general idea of where things are is really, really useful so that you can get to those things quickly. That being said, if you've got a formula memorized in your head, you know that detention time happens to be volume in gallons divided by flow in gallons per minute. That's one less thing you have to look up. So get familiar with the study guides. Typically, the jurisdictions provide you with a copy of the same study guide you're going to be using in the exam. That being said, recognize that you may be working with a paper copy of the study guide in your study period, and your exam might be on a computer, which is a little different. It'll be laid out, but the access will be different. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But just recognize that those study guides are important. Also recognize that your state website is not the only resource available to you for good information about wastewater treatment in general and passing the exam. We've got a list here. We'll provide this. As Matt said, the links are all going to be in there. But the California State University at Sacramento has a great set of books on wastewater treatment. Volume 1 you're looking at right now. There's also a volume 2 that is focused for the upper level exams on wastewater treatment plant management. And this is kind of the Bible when it comes to wastewater treatment plant. It has a little bit about everything. And as we're going through this training program over the next several months, many of the questions that we use as samples are going to come from state exams and from these. Somebody's got their mic on. If you wouldn't mind shutting that off, I can hear some feedback. So going to outside sources is also useful, and maybe if you're not finding what you need on your website in terms of like additional sample questions or other materials that you want to use to study. There's nothing wrong with looking at the state next door and seeing what they've got, because again, wastewater treatment is wastewater treatment is wastewater treatment. The state regulations might vary a little bit, but the processes are going to be universal. And sometimes looking at the information spelled out in different ways can be really helpful in terms of getting to use it or getting it into your head. Similarly, like I said, you might even look outside your region. Washington State, where I grew up, they've got what they call the Red Book. It's their information manual for treatment plant operators. Their exam is based on this, but you can get this for free online, whereas the Sacramento State books that I talked about, those cost $100. They're a great reference. If your wastewater utility doesn't have a copy of those, it might be worth getting, because again, it's a great reference for staff to have to refer to. It's a great training tool for staff members that are coming into the career or trying to work their way to higher levels to have access to these. So if you're part of utility management and you don't have these books, think about getting them. Some of the grants that we work on also provide us with the ability to put copies of these in public libraries where they can be checked out. I can't guarantee that we can do that, but if that's something that you might be interested in, reach out to us and we'll see if there's maybe a facility, either a tribal library or maybe a local town library that we could put a set of these books in so that they would be available for you to check out. So we've talked about need to knows, we've talked about study guides. How do you absorb all that information, right? There's a lot of different topics that we have in here. And my best thought for you is to, as you're studying, don't just read the materials, read it and take notes. Those need to know guides give you a way of keeping track of what you're comfortable with. Notes will help you with short form versions of topics to look at. And as we'll see here in the next slide, as you're reading, you can actually turn the statements in your study guides into potential questions. And you can kind of see what kinds of questions might actually be on an exam. So let's take a minute to read this paragraph, which comes from one of the study guides. It's about pipe size. It says, sewer lines should be at least large enough to allow the use of the cleaning equipment available. When sized properly, a sewer line should flow 1/2 full during average daily flows. The airspace above the half full sewer line helps to maintain aerobic conditions in the wastewater and provides some room for error in determining design flow. So dense little paragraph, one paragraph about pipe size, and I can see at least 3 potential test questions embedded in here. And as you're going through your exam, you can turn those statements into questions, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So for example, what I've highlighted here, when sized properly, a sewer line should flow 1/2 full during average daily flows. Well, you could flip that into a question and answer, maybe put it on a flashcard or something like that. Question being, how full should a sewer line flow if it's sized properly? The answer is 1/2 full during average daily flows. It's right there. And just rewording it is, again, looking at the same information in a slightly different way. And this could give you some good, solid, basic information, because this is the kind of question, for those recall questions that they expect you to know, sort of the basics of, the whys, the wheres, the whats. Here's another one. The airspace helps maintain aerobic conditions and provides room for error for determining design flow, right? So you could just highlight those. I could skim through this and it's got all the key words here highlighted. Similarly, I could write this down in terms of a question. What does the airspace in the sewer do? Helps maintain aerobic conditions and provides for error in design flow. So as you're going through your materials here, read them closely, restate things, write things down. I have a tendency to read aloud because I'm sort of very auditory and visual person. And if I hear myself talking, it just sticks better, And again, not all of these techniques are going to work for everybody. But if you hear some of these or see some of these and find that they are useful for you, use them. Same thing, we've got a third question up here. about cleaning equipment that we could potentially have on an exam. Drawing helps if you're a visual person. Like I said, I'm very visual, so drawing, formulas out for math questions, or sometimes with word problems, I'll draw a little sketch of what they're talking about. I'm a terrible artist, as you could see from my drawings here, but it's useful. So if I've got a question about tank volume, I know that the formula for at least the volume of a rectangular tank is length times width times height. My question is typically going to give me some information and tell me to solve for something. By drawing it out, I can make sure that I've got a clear understanding of what they're actually asking me, that I've got a clear understanding of the variables that they're giving me. So, and here I've got, length and width and height all in feet. You might actually have a question where two of them are in feet and one of them are in yards. And if you're not paying attention, you might multiply them across, knowing it's length times width times height, and you'll get the wrong answer because you forgot to convert them to uniform units. So taking this approach, it takes a little bit of time, but sometimes it can be really helpful, particularly when you're doing sample exams, when you're doing practice tests. I find with math, the best way to get good at math is to do repetition, repeat different kinds of problems with different variables so that I get familiar with it. And again, drawing things out is sometimes helps you visualize what the problem is. We talked about some of the tests being recall, and I want to point out that there are memorization do's and don'ts. There are a lot of things you can and maybe should memorize, both for the test and work, like formulas that you use all the time, loading rates, things like that. But what you don't want to memorize when you're studying is that there was a volume on the sample test, and the last time I took it, the answer was 1,000,000 gallons. What you want to memorize is the process to get to the answer, because chances are there'll be a similar problem on the exam, but it's going to have different variables and a different answer. Or you might memorize material in areas that you're not familiar with through your work experience, like what section specific regulation is, or what a safety procedure is, or what counts as PPE, personal protective equipment. There's a lot of processes you're going to have to know. But again, all of this is for use in your day-to-day work, either where you currently are or where you might end up in the future. Testing yourself is a really good idea. Over the course of your study time, like I said, sometimes you can start with a test to see where you're at, but you definitely want to take available sample tests as you go. And again, a lot of states, a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of these organizations have sample tests that you can download and take. What I would highly recommend, though, is that if you are taking a sample test, do it under sample conditions. They'll typically have the test and an answer key. Don't take the test with the answer key sitting right next to you. If your exam is a 3-hour exam and you've got a 3-hour full sample test, take the 3 hours to do it. If it's a short form version, maybe it's only 33 questions. Take an hour so that you're doing the test under exam conditions. And when I say, I'm speaking from experience here, I'll tell you a little story about a huge failure on my part. When I was in college, I had to take differential equations. I walked into the final with a B+ and I walked out with an F because I bombed the final. And the reason I bombed the final is I hadn't been taking practice tests. I could solve most of the homework problems. That's what my B+ was based on, but I couldn't solve them fast enough under test conditions. So I kind of freaked out in the exam, shut down and panicked. So, taking an exam at home or test exam can be really useful because, again, it's like that pickup game where you're sort of working under test conditions and seeing if not only do you know the information, do you have the recall, can you do the math question, but can you do it in the time allowed? Because, we have a limited amount of time here. Flashcards can be really great. Those white index cards you can buy at the grocery store, or at the hardware store, or Walgreens. Make your own flashcards. There are some flashcards commercially available out there that you can buy. But again, as I was showing you with sort of the close reading and turning them into questions, you can make flashcards for yourself to help you with memorizing, or to help you with sort of going through and making sure you understand the materials. They don't work for everybody. You know, I was talking with one of my coworkers who's going to be working on this exam, or excuse me, this training session later on, and he doesn't like flashcards at all. They don't work for him, but they do for me. So if you're one of those folks that flashcards work for, make flashcards for yourself. It's a great way to test yourself. It's also a great way to have somebody else test you, because they don't have to know the topic or the answer as long as they can read the question to you. If you are using flashcards, it's a really good idea to mix the order up every time you do them. You don't want to, you know, always start with the same card and end with the same card. You know, if you think about your favorite song, it's real easy to sing from start to finish. But if somebody says, you know, give me the third line in the second verse, it's probably going to throw you for a minute. So mix the cards up, you know, shuffle them when you do them, and also set aside the questions that you get right consistently. Again, a big part of study is about finding your weak spots and working on them. And although, you know, getting an answer right all the time is a good confidence builder, you want to spend your time wisely and focus on the areas you're having trouble with. And I'm not saying throw them away or never look at them, but look at them less, because for me, at least, that's kind of a huge confidence builder. I've done this for many classes where, you know, I start with a stack of cards that cover everything. And over time, as I set aside the cards that I'm consistently getting right, the stack of things I don't know gets smaller and smaller. And I find that to be like a really good, you know, positive reinforcement for myself. I always go back to the other ones. But again, this is about figuring out what you know and what you don't know, and making sure that you bone up on that stuff that you're not as good at. And also, don't throw those flashcards away when you're done with the test. You know, you may later on want to get a higher certification. And as our earlier slide covering what's covered on the level 1, 2, 3, and 4 tests for water professionals shows, you're responsible for the same material. So having those cards around for review, maybe 2 years down the road, is going to be really useful. They'll also be really useful for other folks in your organization who are maybe taking the exam. You know, you can make it a little bit easier for the folks coming up behind you. You know, I'm learning how to fly drones. I plan on taking a government exam here pretty soon. I've got a set of flashcards, and when I'm done with that flashcard set, I'm going to put them in our office so that any of my coworkers that wants to take the same test has access to them. It's kind of a way you can sort of, you know, give back to your organization as well as your community. Studying with a partner can be useful, can be distracting depending on who that partner is, but I find that it can really help with accountability. You know, if you've decided that you're going to spend a couple hours every Saturday studying, and there's somebody else in your organization who is doing the same test, and you can do that together, it's a great way to make sure you actually do what you need to do when you need to do it. You know, Saturday's going to come around and the lawn needs to get mowed, or, you know, things need to happen. If you've got an accountability buddy, it sometimes kind of helps. And if you're studying together, it also gives you someone to bounce questions off of, or to, you know, to test, to, you know, run flashcards with, ask questions about. Explain to each other. Like I said, if I usually find if I can't explain something in very simple terms to somebody else, I don't really understand it. So it's a great way to sort of determine whether you know specific topics as well as you think you do. Okay, so that's a bunch of sort of basic study type tips. We'll talk sort of intermittently over the rest of this series about specific kinds of test questions. You know, each one of these areas that we have, you know, topics that we have training on, we're going to have test questions for as well. So you'll be able to kind of work some of these questions as we go, or these exam questions as we go through the series, and kind of apply some of this. But let's talk a little bit about game day. You know, what do you do on test day? And again, it's really important to know what format you're going to be doing the test in. In New Mexico, the tests are all on a computer now. They're also not free. You know, in New Mexico, it costs $30. In your state, it may be more, it may be less. But it's a good idea to be familiar with the format that you're going to take the exam on, because changing formats can be intimidating. I know somebody who actually failed his engineering exam, even though he's one of the smartest guys I know, because he studied for it on paper, expecting to take a paper exam. And when he got to the exam, he found out what was on a computer and it just threw him. That being said, part of your preparation strategy might be to actually schedule a test exam for yourself to familiarize yourself with the process. In other words, maybe you plan on taking the actual exam in December, but you schedule another one in November, just so that you can make sure you're familiar with the format, and you can schedule that not expecting to pass it. That's okay, assuming that you can afford to do it, because like I said, they're not free. So you kind of have to balance this. But a lot of times, because you're not so stressed about passing, the real big game is a month from now, you might actually pass the exam because there's sort of less pressure on you. So that's something to think about if you have time. That being said, if you're going to do that, verify that in your jurisdiction there isn't a mandatory lag period between tests. Sometimes you may have to wait a certain number of days after failing exam to retake it. If everything goes right, you'll pass that practice exam, but you want to make sure that you're not screwing up your schedule and not able to take the exam when you want to, because you did take this sort of pre-game approach. Again, know your test tools. Those reference guides are going to be used in the exam. You want to be familiar with them. You're going to want to know what's on them and what's not. They're going to have most of the formulas you need, but you may not have everyone. So if you're doing sample exams, for example, and you find, hey, wait a minute, I can't seem to find the appropriate formula in my reference guide, that's maybe a formula that you should memorize. Just like you want to monitor your time during your study period, you definitely want to monitor your time during the test, whether that's wearing a watch or if you're on a computer, there's usually a countdown that shows you how much time you have left. Be cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of questions and not a ton of time to do it. So in New Mexico, at least last year, the exam was 4 hours long, and it was 100 questions, which means 240 minutes. So you've got 2 minutes and 24 seconds theoretically per question, and you need to get at least 70 of them right. So even if you only did 70, that's not even 3.5 minutes, not a long time. Of course, a lot of the questions you're going to be able to knock out in a second, but other questions are going to take you more time, and in all likelihood, you're going to run into questions that you can't answer, or at least without a lot of difficulty. The point here is that it's not a lot of time. You want to make sure that you leave enough time to actually finish the exam, or at least finish all the questions you can actually do. So if you get stuck on a question, don't kill too much time. Circle it and go back. You only got to get 70 of them right. And the last thing you want to do is waste a bunch of time on a question that you're just going to have to guess on eventually anyway. So it's a good idea, go through the exam. As you reach questions where you're like, I'm not sure about this, maybe you tick the answer that you think is right, circle it to come back later. Or if you're not sure at all, just circle it, move on. Because again, answering questions correctly is going to boost your confidence. There's going to be stuff on the exam that throws you, but most of the stuff on the exam you'll probably be just fine with. And there's no rule that says you have to do the questions in the order that they're presented to you. You could start at the back and work your way forward, whatever. So again, work your way through the exam. If something's giving you a bunch of time and you realize you're killing a bunch of time on it, circle it, come back later. Use the time you have at the end of the exam, if you have any, to come back and answer that question. Because theoretically, if you only answered 70 questions and you got them all right, you still pass, even though you didn't put an answer down for the other 30. So use the time you have. And it's a good idea to try and use all of the time you have. If, again, speaking from experience here, if you got a 3-hour exam and you finish in 2 hours, it might be worthwhile to use the extra time to go back and check your work. I'm not saying second guess yourself, particularly on the stuff that you're sure with, but if you have a question that you circled and you weren't sure about it and you came back and you gave it your best shot and you got some extra time, maybe go back and review it again and make sure that the answer you picked is the best option that's available. Fixing one wrong answer might be the difference between passing and failing. I know a lot of folks who have, gone into a 3-hour exam, finished after an hour and walked out, and some of them passed, but most of them haven't. So use the time that you have wisely so that you don't have to come back and take the exam again. Let's talk a little bit about questions themselves. You know, these are sort of general ways to approach the exam. Let's talk about the questions themselves. And what I mean by don't fight the premise is don't try to outthink the test. Don't, you know, answer what you think that they're asking. Read the question very carefully and answer what they ask. And also recognize that you're often going to be given answers that are not exactly what you come up with, for example, on a calculator, or that might seem somewhat incomplete. The point here is that you're going to try and pick the best answer from the choices that you're given. So you might be given a math question and you do the math and your answer comes out as 10.2. And you look at your answer options and they say 8, 10, 12, and 14. And 10.2 is none of those, but it's close to 10. In this case, you would pick 10 because it's the closest thing that's correct to the correct answer. So recognize that, you know, there might be rounding issues in math problems, that you might want to give a more complete answer, or you might know that there's a more complete answer than one of the choices that's given to you, but provide or pick the answer that is the best in what seems most appropriate from what you're given. Recognize that funny answers are usually wrong. Sometimes test takers try to throw something humorous in there. I find it to be great stress relief, but if the answer has you cracking up, it's probably not right. It might be, but it probably isn't. So, you know, look at it with some suspicion, but also, again, use your common sense here. So here's an example question from a real exam, although the answers have been changed a little bit. So a question might be, the best way for a manager to transmit information that is important to all employees is, and of course, the first question you might ask me is, why am I not showing you the answers? I find it really good to read the question first to make sure I understand what they're asking for. I actually literally put my hand over the answers on a question when I'm reading it, just to make sure that I've got the question, because sometimes the answers will throw me. So assuming I've read the question, I know what they want now. We're transmitting important information to all our employees. Let me look at my answer options. Tell my mom, send a memorandum, have a face-to-face meeting, put a notice on the plant's website. So Matt, why don't you throw up our first question? Why don't we go ahead and try and answer this and see what we get? And you can logic your way through this, even if you've never seen this question before. All right, got about 35% participated. About halfway there. Let's give it another 30 seconds and we'll see where we're at. Why don't we go ahead and end that and look at our answers and then kind of walk through this. All right. Good. Nobody picked tell your mom. That's the obvious wrong answer here. Might be kind of funny, might be appropriate if it had said tell your dad. And I was the person answering this, I might think, well, my dad's the town gossip. That's a good way to get things around, but not appropriate. Of the other three options that we have, how would we, let's parse those. So we've got send a memorandum, have a face-to-face meeting, and put a notice on the plant's website. Well, sending a memorandum might be useful. Might be a good way to get it to everybody, but on the flip side, who reads everything that they actually get? It says that this is information that's important and it's supposed to get to all employees. So I might not want to use that one, which leaves me with face-to-face meetings and putting notice on a plant's website. Again, all three of these last ones would probably work, but plant website is usually focused on external folks. You know, it's the website that the customers go to, and not everybody might have access to it, or not everybody at the plant probably looks at it all that often. And again, we're talking about sort of the best appropriate answer of the options. If it's important information and you want to get it to all the employees and know that you've gotten it there, having a face-to-face meeting meets all those criteria. So again, main point taken away, funny answer is not the right one, and nobody picked that one. And for the other answers that are available, you can kind of work your way through the options and try to figure out which of these options would be best. And a face-to-face meeting is definitely going to get the information across to everybody. You can go ahead and close that. You can eliminate knowledge through common sense, or answers through knowledge and common sense. I'm going to give you another example here. A chlorine cylinder is thought to be leaking. If aqueous ammonia vapor is passed over the valve, the presence of a leak would cause what? So basically, the keys here are the fact that we've got chlorine and a leak. And it's saying, well, what is the outcome going to be if I go in there and pass aqueous ammonia vapor over this potentially leaking chlorine cylinder? My options here are these four: a loud noise, an odor of hydrogen sulfide, red smoke, or white smoke. Matt, go ahead and throw that up for me.
Yeah, James, I don't think we got this in our poll.
Oh,
My
okay, no
apologies.
problem. Well, I'll just walk through it. That's okay. So when we think about this, we've got chlorine. Chlorine's poisonous. If you're a system that uses chlorine gas cylinders, they're locked away. Probably told about how dangerous they are the first time on the job. So let's evaluate these answers, knowing that what we're dealing with here is something that could potentially kill you. Chlorine gas. Well, if putting aqueous ammonia vapor over the cylinder or over the valve produced a loud noise, what does that imply? Some kind of explosion. And that's probably not something you want to have around chlorine. So you could probably rule that out. The second option here is an odor of hydrogen sulfide, which is implying that you can smell it, which is implying you're around poison gas with no PPE on. So, if you're protected, there's no way you're going to actually be able to smell the chlorine. So that's probably not a good option either, because it's kind of implying that you're doing something unsafe. Which leaves us with two options: red smoke and white smoke. Just using common sense, even if you had never seen anything about this, you don't use chlorine, you don't know anything about it other than that it's dangerous, you could eliminate two of the four answers. And even if you have to guess, now you've got a 50-50 chance of getting the right answer. Whereas before, sort of, kind of doing some mental review based on what you kind of know about dangerous subjects or dangerous materials, excuse me, you would have had a 25% chance. The answer happens to be white smoke. But again, sort of using common sense, process of elimination, you can knock down a lot of the wrong answers. Other things you can do is reframe questions. Again, I tend to read the question without looking at the answers so that I don't get thrown and I understand exactly what they're asking for. So you might get a question something like this, where it says, which of the following is not a measure of volume? We've got three options. Did I give you this one, Matt? Yeah. So go ahead and answer this real quick, and then we'll walk our way through it. Okay, give it another 10 seconds or so. All right, what do we got? All right, so 75% or 74% of you got this right. And again, this is one of those things where you got to focus closely on what the question actually is. It says, which of the following is not a measure of volume? This is, one of those things is not like the other ones. So we've got cubic feet, cubic meters, gallons, and square inches. the correct answer is square inches, and I'll show you a couple of different ways to get there. One would be reframing the question in terms of what actually is a measure of volume. And this is going to, again, point out how it's really useful to understand and be familiar with your reference documents. You could use the reference document to work your way through this question. So which of these is a volume measure? Well, if I look in my reference document, I can see that in the volume section, I've got a conversion for gallons to cubic feet. So those are both volumes. So that gives me two of these options right away that are volume. If I look over on the metric side, I've got a conversion for gallons to cubic meters. That's also a volume. So three of those are measures of volume, which means the last one, square inches, isn't. And, if I wasn't quite sure, if I look in my reference guide, that's showing up under the area list. So again, another way of approaching it, which of these is a measure of volume? I've got three that are, one that's not. Of course, you have to make sure that you answer the correct question, not the reframed question. So it's asking which is not a measure of volume, and we know based on this that square inches, it's an area, not a volume. That's our correct answer. Again, this might be one of those areas where doing a sketch could be helpful. Another way of approaching it, it's like talking about volume. Well, I might think of the volume of a retaining basin. It's a rectangle. If I draw out a cube or a three-dimensional rectangle, I know I've got a length, I've got a width, and I've got a height. So if I'm familiar with my units, I recognize that I'm going to have some sort of units cubed. So feet times feet times feet is feet cubed. Meters times meters times meters is meters cubed. So that, again, lets me know that these first two are definitely volume. Gallons, you might just know from going to the grocery store, gallons are a volume. Gasoline is a volume. Again, you've got that form with a conversion factor. If you're looking at this diagram, you might recognize that, oh, well, my basin has a length, a width, and a height, and I know how many gallons are in that. Therefore, gallons must be volume as well. Anyway, we're just at time, and I'm going to run over like 2 minutes here. Again, this is some basic information about how to approach the study, how to approach the exam, and how to approach questions. And as I said, as we go through the different topics in the rest of this training series, we're going to have sample questions for you to answer, and we will walk through each one of those to tell you how we got there. So you can kind of use these training sessions as part of the study. For the other sessions, it's a good idea to, have a calculator, have some spare paper, have a pencil with you, so that as we're working through these questions, you can try them as we're going along. So just to review, you definitely want to have a study plan. You really want to manage your time, both your study time and your time during the exam. Really make use of training handouts and materials and manuals. If you can't find them, reach out to us. We can help point you in the right direction at the available materials in your particular jurisdiction or in other areas that might be useful for you as well. Because again, although the weighting of different kinds of questions in your jurisdiction might be different, the manuals are all basically covering the same types of materials. When you're doing your study, take notes at trainings, take notes during your study. Those are really good for later reference. Again, you're kind of working your way through this process, getting familiar. Having notes is a good way to refresh your memory, sort of a short form version to make sure you understand things. Draw sketches of problems if they help you. If you're a visual person, it's really useful. If not, and again, this is something that if you're not visual and that doesn't work for you, find something that does. What definitely is going to work is testing yourself, though. It's a really good idea to try and take a couple of practice exams before you get to the real thing, just to verify that you know what you think you know. Focus on the weak points, because again, stuff that you're good at, you're going to get right on the exam. The stuff that you're weaker at is the stuff that you're likely to miss. So focus on the things that give you trouble. Memorize what you need to, but again, memorize processes, memorize, answers like the pipe questions that we talked about. Don't memorize specific answers to math questions because they're guaranteed going to be different. Study with a partner if it helps. Definitely start studying early, well before the exam date.